In March of 2021, 77-year-old Denis Sassou Nguesso clinched 88% of the vote in the elections held in the Republic of the Congo, a country also known as Congo-Brazzaville. This was amid accusations of vote irregularities, including the stuffing of ballot boxes. Sassou Nguesso has been in power for 36 of the 61 years this oil-rich country has been independent. Denis Sassou Nguesso is one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, having first come to power 4 decades ago. He was installed as president by the military in 1979 and lost his position in the country's first multi-party elections in 1992. However, it was through force that Sassou Nguesso again rose to the country's top office. He managed to overthrow his predecessor at the end of a civil war that left several thousand people dead. And this war remains a painful wound within the Congolese society. In this episode of African Biographics, we cover the story of the rise and fall and rise again of Denis Sassou Nguesso, a man nicknamed by his fellow African leaders as the Emperor of the Republic of Congo. The man known as Denis Sassou Nguesso was born in 1943 in the central region of the Republic of the Congo. The Republic of Congo, also known as Congo-Brazzaville, is a former French colony of West Central Africa. This country shares common borders with Gabon, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, the DRC, and the Gulf of Guinea. According to Sassou Nguesso, when he was a young boy, his father enjoyed great local respect as a village headman and as the president of a local hunters association. Sassou is a member of the Mbochi tribe, and when he was 10 years old, he was initiated into the Mbochi Brotherhood. Shortly thereafter, he left home to study at a regional school which was 100 kilometers away from his home village. Proving himself to be an able student, Sassou won a place at the Normal College for Teachers in an area now called Lubomo. By his own account, Sassou graduated first in his class but was denied a place at a prestigious school in Brazzaville, the capital, because he lacked the necessary political connections. So instead, he was admitted to a military training school. Sassou served 1 year in the Congo and then undertook more advanced training in France, where he was deeply impressed by the country and its military establishment. Upon his return, Sassou joined a paratrooper unit, which he later commanded as a captain in 1968, and by the early 1970s had risen to the rank of colonel. It was during this time that Sassou Nguesso took an active role in the country's politics. He joined the Congolese Labour Party, also known as the PCT, which embraced a Marxist-Leninist ideology, and the party was designated the country's sole ruling party in 1970. Denis Sassou Nguesso was fortunate enough to become a protege of President Marien Ngouabi, who was in power between 1968 to 1977. President Marien Ngouabi was assassinated in 1977, and at the time of Ngouabi's assassination, Sassou was perhaps the most influential figure in the army and the party. However, Sassou's rival within the PCT party, Yombi Opango, outmaneuvered him and became the leader of the PCT's military committee as well as the head of state. When Opango came to power, he then appointed Sassou Nguesso as the first vice president of the PCT's military committee. Joachim Yombi Opango never fully consolidated his grip on power and was forced to share real power with other military leaders, including Sassou. In February of 1979, Yombi's opponents organized a meeting of the PCT's Central Committee in which he was ousted in favor of Sassou. So Denis Sassou Nguesso became the president of the republic and the head of the PCT party. Upon taking power, Sassou purged his most important ethnic and military rivals from the party, of which he assumed supreme control. In the first half of the 1980s, Sassou's regime was boosted by high world petroleum prices, which allowed him to undertake a massive expansion of the state sector and patronize his political cronies. Meanwhile, his Marxist and anti-colonial rhetoric resonated well in Africa. Congo also benefited from substantial Soviet, Chinese, and Cuban aid during this period, even as French companies invested in the country's petroleum sector. Despite the country's left-wing stance, the nation of France continued as the main source of aid for the Congo, as well as being the main trade partner and the principal exploiter of the Congo's oil resources. The Republic of the Congo initially enjoyed a period of relative stability under Sassou Nguesso, and his PCT re-elected him to the presidency in 1984 and again in 1989. However, the honeymoon soon came to an end for him. This was because after 1985, falling petroleum prices hit the Congolese economy very hard, and Sassou's popularity began to wane. It was also around this time that Sassou Nguesso brutally put down an attempted coup against him. This was in 1987. Following this attempt, 20 senior army officers were arrested for plotting the coup, and most of them came from the northern Kuyu tribe from which his predecessors, Marien Ngouabi and Yomi Opango, came from. Following this series of events, Sassou Nguesso turned to more repressive measures in quelling public dissent. And so by the end of the year 1990, public opinion and sentiment had turned completely against Sassou. Following the National Conference in Benin, which brought that country's leader, Mathieu Kérékou's unopposed reign to an end, as well as the end of the Cold War, public pressure on the Sassou regime to liberalize the political scene in the Congo started mounting in 1990. Under this pressure, Sassou announced in July of 1990 that Congo would take steps towards becoming a multi-party state. The opposition, however, demanded the immediate convening of a sovereign national conference just like the one in Benin. Students, unionized workers, and religious groups organized public demonstrations to rally support for such a conference during the final months of the year 1990. By the end of the year, Sassou had finally bowed to this demand, and the conference was allowed to convene on the 25th of February 1991. This conference turned into a national forum demanding democracy and accountability, and Sassou Nguesso did not succeed in controlling the narrative at this event. The conference actually ended up wresting real power from him. Denis Sassou Nguesso was reduced to a mere figurehead, and during November of 1991, he had his indemnity from prosecution lifted. He too would be held accountable for his actions in the past. A transitional government headed by Prime Minister André Milingo moved quickly to write a new constitution and democratic electoral code, and to prepare the way for a referendum on a new constitution designed to bring multi-party democracy to the Republic of Congo. Sassou competed in the presidential elections of 1992 but finished third. He then threw his support to Pascal Lissouba, who prevailed in the second round against a man by the name Bernard Colelas. Afterwards, Sassou remained as the head of a reformed non-Marxist PCT party. When Pascal Lissouba failed to award Sassou's PCT party with a sufficient role in his new government, Sassou joined with Bernard Colelas' party in the opposition in the National Assembly. This new alliance then deprived Lissouba of a majority in the parliament. Following this, Lissouba proceeded to illegally dissolve the parliament and order fresh elections, with the hope of him gaining the majority needed to control the National Assembly. This led to a wave of civil unrest that was only ended by the appointment of a neutral cabinet in December of 1992. When the legislative elections were rerun in May of 1993, the opposition rejected the results and boycotted the second round. What ensued was a wave of civil unrest in the country, mainly in Brazzaville, the capital. All three parties involved rapidly mobilized their militia forces, turning Brazzaville into a battleground along ethnic lines. The Zulus fought for Lissouba, while the Cobra militia fought for Sassou Nguesso. The Cobra members were drawn from Sassou's sparsely populated northern Congo. Bernard Colelas had a militia group called the Ninjas. The clashes amongst these groups in 1993 did not exceed the threshold of war, which is defined as 1,000 fatalities. After these violent clashes, Denis Sassou Nguesso spent much of the time between 1993 to 1996 in quasi-exile in France, fearing for his security in Congo. In France, he maintained close ties with officials in the various governments of President Mitterrand as well as Jacques Chirac. He also maintained close relationships with French industrial leaders. Tensions between Sassou Nguesso and Pascal Lissouba were never really resolved, and violence between their militias erupted again in the months prior to the 1997 presidential and legislative elections. Sassou Nguesso made a return to Brazzaville in early 1997 to begin his presidential election campaign, for which the elections were scheduled for July of that year. He also readied his Cobra militia for a possible cancellation of the elections. In May of that year, Sassou's campaign visit to the northern city of Owando, the hometown of Joachim Yomi Opango, the former leader of the country, who was now Pascal Lissouba's campaign manager, led to violent clashes. On the 5th of June 1997, Pascal Lissouba sent an armed detachment to Sassou's residence to arrest several of his associates said to have been implicated in this violence. At that point, Sassou's militia resisted these forces and a civil war commenced in the Republic of Congo. Despite several mediation attempts and ceasefire declarations, fighting continued and Sassou Nguesso took control of several towns in the north of the country. After several months of neutrality as the mayor of Brazzaville, Bernard Colelas decided to side with Pascal Lissouba, and his ninja militias joined the fighting. The war raged on from June through mid-October 1997 and essentially reached a stalemate. Sassou Nguesso's forces finally had a breakthrough in taking control of the presidential residence and other key installations in the country. This came after Angolan government forces joined in the war against the government forces of Lissouba. So here's why Angola came into the picture. Angola's critical intervention at this stage was motivated by issues related to its own civil war. Pascal Lissouba had allowed Angola's rebel UNITA movement, led by Jonas Savimbi, to set up an office headquarters in the second largest city of the Republic of Congo, Pointe-Noire, in 1997. And Pascal Lissouba appeared to have allowed UNITA forces to operate from within the Congo. Also, with the fall of Mobutu in neighboring Zaire, now DRC, Congo-Brazzaville had become the last fuel and weapons base for UNITA, and so the Angolan government did not like this setup. This is why they threw their weight behind Sassou Nguesso in this fight against Lissouba. The Congolese army was not much of help to Lissouba, as their loyalties were divided, with only some units supporting him and others still supporting the former leader, Sassou Nguesso. Subsequently, Angolan troops invaded the capital and were greatly superior to Lissouba's forces. On the 15th of October 1997, Denis Sassou Nguesso returned to power while Pascal Lissouba and Bernard Colelas were forced to flee the country. Most Congolese believe that Sassou received aid for this battle from official French contacts, executives of the petroleum company of Aquitaine, and some regional leaders, particularly Gabon's president Omar Bongo. And as I mentioned earlier, Sassou Nguesso had always been a reliable ally of France, even in his Marxist days, and had been treated as a VIP when in opposition to Pascal Lissouba he had visited France. Well, France denied that it had intervened in the war on behalf of Sassou Nguesso. They insisted that their sole objective had been to support Omar Bongo's mediation efforts. In an unrelated matter, the late Omar Bongo was Sassou Nguesso's son-in-law. On the other hand, Elf Aquitaine, the French oil multinational that handled Congo's oil, had clearly favored a return to power of Denis Sassou Nguesso, who had always dealt with Elf favorably on its monopoly position in Congo's petroleum industry, as opposed to the regime of Pascal Lissouba that had to some extent opened up the oil industry for competition. During this brutal civil war, the greater part of Brazzaville's population had dispersed in the bush or become refugees across the river in Kinshasa, and during this period of fighting, some 10,000 Congolese people died. Although a ceasefire was declared in 1999, Denis Sassou Nguesso was faced with the violence that persisted in some regions of the country. In addition, he was confronted with the continued economic problems and with allegations of corruption within the government. But he was now back in full control in the Republic of the Congo. With Denis Sassou Nguesso back in power, he implemented a series of economic and political reforms to try and rebuild the country from bankruptcy and strengthen the democratic process, although the legitimacy of the democratic reform was often called into question by the opposition. He was re-elected in 2002 in an election clouded by controversy. Some opposition candidates boycotted the race, claiming that the democratic reform was still lacking and that the election would not be free and fair. As a result, Sassou Nguesso faced no real competition in these elections, and the legitimacy of his overwhelming victory was disputed by the opposition. Despite the challenges to his leadership within the country, in 2006, Sassou Nguesso was tapped to serve in a regional position when he was named the chairman of the African Union. In December of 2008, Sassou and Presidents Omar Bongo of Gabon and Teodoro Obiang of Equatorial Guinea were the target of a lawsuit that accused them of misuse of public funds, embezzlement and money laundering in connection with a luxury property in France. However, the controversy surrounding the allegations seemed to be little to no consequences for Sassou Nguesso as he prepared for the July 12, 2009 presidential election. And just like before in 2002, the election was again boycotted by the main opposition candidates, and Sassou Nguesso was re-elected by a wide margin of victory. Although the opposition and some organizations claimed that there were incidents of fraud and intimidation, international observers from the African Union declared the election to have been free and fair. After these elections, the country's constitution barred him from standing for another term as president, but steps were set in motion to work around that limitation. So in this regard, there was a proposal to amend the constitution to eliminate term limits and raise the maximum age for a presidential candidate. These changes would effectively allow Sassou Nguesso to stand for another presidential term. The proposal amendment to the constitution was put to a referendum in October of 2015. The opposition boycotted the referendum, but officials reported that almost 3/4 of registered voters turned out to vote, and that 92% indicated that they were in favor of the proposal. Sassou Nguesso was selected to be his PCT's party candidate in the elections that were scheduled for March 2016. And these elections took place amid a much criticized communications blackout. Sassou Nguesso was victorious, with officials claiming that he won 60% of the vote. Well, this result was disputed by the opposition, but it's fair to say that for him, the mission had been a huge success for Sassou Nguesso. According to the United Nations Human Development Index, the Republic of the Congo is ranked at 149 out of 189 countries, only 2 points above war-torn Syria. Yet the Republic of the Congo is Africa's 6th biggest oil producer with an estimated production rate of 350,000 barrels per day, earning the nation huge revenues. However, under Sassou Nguesso's leadership, the Republic of the Congo remains very poor, with nearly half the population living below the poverty line. Transparency International also ranks this country among the world's top 20 most corrupt countries. Amid all of this, there have also been allegations of Denis Sassou Nguesso using his position of power to benefit him and his family. In the past, his daughter and her husband have been charged with corruption and money laundering in France. In April of 2019, an organization called Global Witness alleged that Sassou's other daughter, who is a member of parliament and the president's head of communications, received almost $20 million, apparently from stolen state funds, and used the money to buy a luxury apartment in Trump Tower, New York, in the United States. She denied these allegations. There were also reports that his son, Denis Sassou Nguesso, also an elected member of the Congolese parliament, allegedly took more than $50 million from the Congolese treasury funds for his personal gain. This is also according to an investigation by Global Witness. Denis Sassou Nguesso was re-elected in March of 2021, reportedly with more than 88% of the vote. During the election period, internet service in the country was shut down and the outcome was disputed with allegations of fraud. Despite all these allegations, Sassou Nguesso is comfortably at the helm and maintains a tight grip on power. Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are on the rise and fall and rise again of Denis Sassou Nguesso, the man known as the Emperor of the Republic of Congo. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.